evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Joe Carbonetta, and this is Arroyo Live. Our program is produced by and through the facilities of Pasadena Media. Although the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic served as the inspiration for its creation, new events continue to highlight the relevance of its concept. And so it is our continued hope to help bring together and strengthen our community through informative and meaningful conversation. We are live if you are watching on Tuesday, June 30th, and there will be an opportunity to call in with your questions or comments later on in the program. You can submit them anytime via email to arroyolive@pasadenamedia.org. Our program this evening will focus on how COVID-19 is affecting local government. I am joined by Dr. Michael Alvarez, professor of political and computational social science at the California Institute of Technology, and Mr. Ken Chawkins, vice president of the Pasadena Community Access Corporation, our parent company. I was going to say Pasadena Media's parent company. Gentlemen, thank you so much both for joining me this evening. And I'd like to ask each of you to please take a moment to tell our viewers a little bit about yourselves. Michael, I'd like to begin with you.
We're good, thank you, and thank you for having me this evening. I'm really excited to be on and to be on with my friend and neighbor Ken. I've got a mouthful of a title there at CalTech, but I'm a professor mainly focusing on political science, which we actually in fact do quite well at CalTech. But with a focus largely on data and in particular these days, large scale computational kind of applications focusing around political science. I've been a Pasadena resident since 1993. Live in West Pasadena, my daughter went through the schools through here in the private school system here in Pasadena. My wife's a professor at USC, and like I said, we just live a few doors down from Ken, so I'm excited to be on with him this evening.
Wow, so you literally are neighbors.
Really, just 2 doors down.
All right, Ken, your turn.
Indeed, we are. I'm a resident of Pasadena since 1996, a year before my daughter was born. In addition to my sort of corporate world and all that, I've been an active citizen in Pasadena since that time. And frankly, it's been refreshing. I grew up in the west side of Los Angeles and thought Pasadena was sort of near Ohio. But it really was very, very distant away. But when I got here and experienced sort of the civic vibrancy here, I'm a homer. I believe in what Pasadena is doing and how it does what it does, and have been active in public education issues and civic issues along the way, just sort of very active. And that energizes me. I think that's the right way to do what we do in a democratic system. So I've known Michael obviously for that many years, and we've both been very active locally. And so happy to engage in a conversation about what all this new world means for that effort.
Well, again, thank you both for joining us. I know especially you, Ken, having been in the city for such a long period of time, you've certainly seen the city undergo a lot of changes over the years.
Yes.
It's definitely come a long way.
Indeed.
Well, as I mentioned at the top of the program, the inspiration for our show originally came about because of the stay-at-home orders and the fact that everyone was sequestered as a result of COVID-19. And so we were trying to help facilitate a continued sense of community. And to that end, we tend to open up most shows by asking each of our guests how the COVID pandemic has affected you personally. And I'd like to direct that question to both of you gentlemen. I'm not going to point a finger at who goes first. I don't know who wants to jump on that one, but I do hope you'll both take a moment to answer that.
Sure. Ken, you want to start?
Sure. Look, Pasadena is a civically engaged place. A good friend and colleague, former colleague of mine, Nat Reed, who most people who are listening to this will know, said, Pasadena is the kind of place where people come home from work, they feed the kids, and then they go out to a committee meeting. We're active. There are a lot of communities that don't do that. They come home and they feed their kids, and they're active, but they're active locally or in their home, whatever. And so I for the past 20 plus years, you're used to coming home and being out. This situation we have right now gives pause to that. What does being out mean? And at first, it's uncomfortable. You can't go out. You can't go out to eat. You can't go out to a committee meeting. You can't go out. And my sense is there, the same way when after 9/11, when we had to go to the airport, we felt uncomfortable with the belts and the shoes and all that stuff, where right now that doesn't bother us anymore. Right now, we're in this zone where it was bothersome. It's bothersome where we can't go to a meeting. We can't physically be there. My sense is we're in this transition of Pasadena is not saying we can't. We're moving towards how do we stay civically active? And so COVID for me has been, I'm used to getting home and going out to a committee meeting or a neighborhood council meeting or a city council meeting or a school board meeting or whatever. At this point, we're trying to figure out what's the best way to be civically active, not we can't. And that's how it's affected. We're transitioning through that in a virtual way.
All right. Well, and I'll echo what Ken said in the sense that one way that this has affected us just dramatically has been how it's curtailed our opportunities to engage in life and business as normal. Like Ken, I'm involved in a lot of organizations, and not just professor at CalTech, but I'm on the board of directors at the Mayfield Senior School. And we would ordinarily be meeting, frequently in person, and we've had to stop that and move everything virtual, and also work, as that school has transitioned to the online educational format, and how the pandemic has affected the school's operations and finances. I think it's affected my wife. My wife is a professor at USC in the Keck School, and she had to work with her colleagues to almost immediately work to get Keck to close down its research operations, and then more recently to try to spin them back up. And she's been working, I have to say, 12, 14-hour days, 7 days a week on that. We had to bring our daughter home from Lewis and Clark College up in Portland.
Yeah, that's a good example.
And help her work through, finishing off her freshman year of college from home, completely unmoored from the environment and the friends and that freshman experience that we had hoped that she would have at a liberal arts college. Like my wife and I both went to liberal arts colleges. It's affected us at CalTech dramatically, and we can come back and talk about that more specifically. But it's affected me personally at CalTech because I'm a person who interacts a lot with students, not the undergraduates, in particular those in my research group and my colleagues. That's one of the beautiful aspects of life at CalTech as a professor. We're very small, but we're very active and engaged. We only have 900 undergraduates and a few hundred faculty, which means that undergraduates and grad students get to know their faculty members personally and one-on-one, and we work together on research projects, and we work together in the classroom. And not being able to do that has really been an issue for all of us, and something that we've all scrambled to get technology to solve. But finally, the pandemic has opened up for many of us at CalTech opportunities for new research. I'm engaged in a whole series of new and really interesting and hopefully important research projects to help us understand how people are communicating about the pandemic online and social media. We're working on detecting fake and disinformation online. I've been working very closely with election officials throughout the state and the country to try to figure out how to run elections in this current environment. And we're doing research, very active research with the county and with the Secretary of State on that. So, it's also opened up lots of interesting opportunities that, being at home and just being in front of a computer has been, challenging to take on, but also something that, I and my colleagues have really kind of jumped headfirst into at CalTech.
All right. Well, Michael, you did mention that the pandemic has adversely affected things at CalTech as well, and that hopefully we can get back into that a little bit later. I am kind of intrigued by something that you just mentioned, and that is communication, not only in the modern era, but in the era of, or in the time period of this pandemic. And I'm wondering if you can expand on that a little bit. How has communication been affected as a result of the pandemic? I mean, besides the obvious that we are now socially distant from just about everyone and everything, what are the other challenges that we are now facing as a result of this?
Well, I think that's we could spend hours talking about that. It's a great question. It's a great question. It's how has it really changed? Not how do we not just communicate with each other, on a personal basis, but also how do we communicate with colleagues, and how do we get information, and how are we trying to use these technologies to stay engaged in our relationships, our work relationships, but also to stay engaged in civic life and in our a world in general. So there's a lot of different ways to take that. But what we've had to do by and large is we've had to stop personal communications, one-on-one communications in person. And so I think that has been very disruptive. And I think it's very disruptive for many aspects of our lives. I think it's obviously disrupted the educational process, all the way down to kids who are, we're in preschools all the way through sort of the university experience. It's disrupted a lot of our ability to engage in civic life in Pasadena. We can't go to city council meetings one-on-one anymore. It's also disrupted, a lot of business operations. I mean, there are just the disruption in terms of how businesses communicate and how businesses operate, I think, has been profound. And it's not just a matter of the businesses closing their doors, the retail, the restaurants. It's all of those other kinds of businesses that many of them are here in Pasadena that work in all sorts of different areas of communication, like advertising, and digital commerce, and all sorts of really exciting opportunities. Those businesses have been disrupted and changed. I think the biggest question that I'm really interested in here is, how is this going to affect life moving forward? We eased out, of the lockdown. People did start to go out and start to re-engage, I think, socially, maybe a little bit too much, because now it looks like we may have to go back into some, maybe, some form of stay at home again, and we're definitely going to be wearing masks for quite some time. But, looking forward a year or two, are we going to, or 5 years from now, are we going to continue to use the technologies to engage with our government? Are we going to continue to use the technologies to engage with our families? I mean, for example, we've been having Zoom family meetings, every week or every two. Or are we going to continue that? That's kind of a fun tradition that we've started up. And so, I think that's the biggest issue, is to what extent this will continue in the future.
All right. Well, and gentlemen, I want to say that there is no exclusivity here when it comes to a question. Anytime I've got one, it's feel free to chime in. It's really targeted to the both of you. Ken, I'm curious to know if you have any thoughts on this as well.
I do indeed. I think if you think about the word social distancing, we're not socially distancing, we're physically distancing. I think we need to change the word socially is changing. So we are socially still connected, but we're physically distancing. And so I think, Michael, you bring up a really, really good point. Public education. Public education, the model of public education is still an industrial model. It's literally 100 years old. It's one person up at the front with 30 or 40 people in front, listening to, taking notes to, et cetera, right? So this is really forcing what's been coming in education for many, many years, which is, how do we transfer knowledge? How do we move knowledge? How do we socialize and adjust young people into our society from a K through 12 or whatever the number is system, right? That is not physical. It's not, they're not in the same room, right? So similarly, Michael, how you do it with college students, how we do it with government systems, how we do what we do is adjusting. And we have actually really physically we've fought it. We've fought it because the technology's been here for 35, 40 years, but we have said, no, we got to show up. We got to show up. We got to be there. This COVID has actually forced and says, I don't care if you think you have to be there. You can't be there. Now you figure it out. And so the assets need to be put in a place that says, let's figure out how do we take kids from age, let's take first grade, 5 through 15 or whatever, and say, how do we move them into a society where they learn what they're supposed to learn, socialize what they're supposed to socialize, et cetera, given the technological changes or health changes, right? So it's a window. And my sense is we should take the window in Pasadena and be as active as we possibly can and be as leaning in as our civic nature tells us to be, and not be afraid of figuring out how to do it with a model that's not one teacher, 40 kids. It's not a city council where everybody shows up on a Monday night or whatever. There are all kinds of models. Let's figure them out. But let's not lose the civic engagement because the technology, because the medical or the health issues are challenging us. Let's use the technology to increase the civic engagement using technology, if that makes sense.
Well, no, Ken, you mentioned this phrase, civic engagement. I realize this next question might be just a little bit off center with both of your gentlemen's fields of expertise, but I have to pose this question. Is virtual socialization an effective replacement for real physical interaction? Like, can we be as productive if we remain completely in a virtual world as opposed to the old model, as you mentioned it?
Michael, let me go first, and I'll make it short. I promise. Sure. Look, I hear from a lot of people, nothing can replace physical interaction. No, it can't replace it, but that doesn't mean it's better or worse. At the turn of the century, you moved it radio, and then the movies, they were going to replace radio, and then television was going to replace radio, and then all of a sudden cable, and everything was going to replace everything. We still have radio, we still have movies, we still have television, cable, network television, we still have cable, we have computers, we have all kinds of things. My sense is that it's not good or bad. There's multiple ways to communicate to multiple audiences. And our children are going to grow up figuring out what's the best way to get to the audiences they want to affect civic discourse. That's what they're going to do. Now, look, did the what's it called? The telex, did that go away? Yeah, there are certain things that go away eventually, but radio is still with us. My point is the telecommunications technology revolution is offering multiple ways to engage civic activity. And it's up to the audience that wants to engage that activity to figure out which one's the best one to move discourse, right? Michael, I don't know how that around elections, but that's what I feel.
No, if that was a short answer, I'd be afraid of the long one.
Sorry, Joe.
But it's a good answer because I think that Ken's kind of putting his finger on kind of the real answer here, which is that it's going to depend. I think that what the pandemic did is it forced us to have a clean break, right? Yep. With a lot of our one-on-one, in-person or in group interactions. And so we've now had the opportunity to use technologies in lots of different ways. And I think that what we will be doing, which I think is what Ken's saying, is we're just going to have to pick and choose in the future as to which of these technology is going to work and which one. I'll give you an example from my world, which is the academic world. One of the great boondoggles of being an academic is getting to go to conferences and give lectures and go to other universities, travel the world, right? That's one of the great joys of being an academic. Well, we haven't been able to do that for months. There are many conferences that I love going to, but I wasn't able to attend in person. Now, I miss that because I miss the social interaction, the informal interaction of those conferences. But to be honest, in the virtual format that we've been experimenting with many of these academic conferences, it's a very effective and efficient way to communicate. If you want to really have a very effective and efficient communication of research ideas, to be honest, the online virtual conferences are really effective. And so I think we're going to be moving to more of that. And not only is it a good idea because it's effective and efficient, it helps our environment too. I mean, there's a whole environmental side to all this that I don't know, we're probably not going to want to talk about tonight.
No, it's great, Michael. That's great.
There's all these kind of ancillary benefits that I think that the experimentation with the technology has produced for our society.
All right. Well, you do mention the environmental aspects. Obviously, at least in the early days of the pandemic, we saw a lot fewer people commuting. The roadways were a lot clearer, so there was less traffic, less fuel usage. I wonder how much beyond that there is an advantage from a green standpoint, because we're still using the same amount of power. It's just that everybody has shifted their workspace from the office to home. I wonder if you have a few more insights on how this is an environmental.
Well, I'm not sure that it would challenge the premise, because I'm not entirely sure. I for example, suspect that CalTech is not air conditioning many of the offices, for example. I have no idea throughout Pasadena how many businesses have reduced their use of electricity and how that may have changed in terms of residential use. So I really don't know. But what I do hope is that that this will kind of lead people to change certain kinds of behavior. For example, academic conferences. I mean, I suspect that business and travel is going to continue to be reduced as businesses are going to find that using Zoom for small meetings or as a substitute for sending people to all over the globe is going to be a cost savings that I think will continue. So I suspect that the airline industry and the hospitality industry are going to continue to suffer, and I think there's environmental benefits associated with that. But I also would love to see, the city, our city in particular, do more at this moment in time to try to facilitate people to get out of their cars, to use mass transit, to walk, and to bike. I mean, we have a wonderful community that in some ways is set up for that. But right now, I really don't think the city is being extremely proactive in making the streets safer for pedestrians or bikers, and to really start to encourage people as we transition to going back to work to get out of your cars and don't use your car as much. So if we can make some of these behaviors a little more sticky, I do think even if they're just marginal improvements in terms of the energy use and environmental impact, those marginal effects are going to be very important in the long run.
All right.
Joe, here's a short response. I agree with what Michael just said. Literally 100%. I agree. It's completely, people should take advantage of seeing what's going on. And just now, when we go back to quote unquote normal, don't go back to normal. Do what we're doing now. There's a total environmental benefit, completely.
Well, one of the things, and again, this might be slightly, out of the field of expertise and might call for a little bit of speculation, and I apologize for doing that to you, gentlemen. But on the environmental standpoint, there has been a push for many, many years to get people to use public transportation, as a alternative to every person being in their own car and all of the traffic congestion that brings with it. But the flip side is now we have COVID-19 and people are being asked to stay as far away from each other as possible. What do we do with that going forward? How do we solve that problem in the future? Is mass transportation something that's just going to go by the wayside as a result of this? Is that not going to be one of the advantages that we reap from this?
So, Michael, let me jump in. First, the notion that public transportation is going away that's not going to happen. So, secondly, before all COVID, public transportation, including bus and train ridership, was declining. It was declining because of this other thing that was going on, which is Uber and all the autonomous vehicles and all that stuff that was happening. So you had multiple things going on. I think COVID or all the things that are going on right now are saying, jumble it all up and say, how do you want to get from here to there? Look, millions and millions of people are not showing up to office spaces because they're staying home. And millions of businesses are saying, we don't need to pay for office space. Okay, so that is one side of the equation. The other is on the 1 day a week that I have to go downtown. Do I take my car? Do I take a bus? Do I take a train? The MTA and transit agencies around the country are trying to refigure out how they do what they do because they have declining ridership even before COVID. They have to figure out how to pencil it out to figure out how it's gonna work because 3 or 4 days a week people are going to be at home. They're not going to go. So I think the question is, it's like algebra. It's just an equation that needs to be solved, but the new X's and Y's are moved around. And COVID has moved them around and we don't know what to do. But at a certain point, we'll get to a point where we're going to look and go, okay, now we know where the X's and Y's are. And the market and or government is going to move those things around and say, stop investing in X and invest in Y. Because Michael Alvarez isn't going to go to CalTech 4 or 5 days a week. He's going to go 1 day a week or downtown or wherever he's going to go. That we just know that demographically. We have to get through this pass and then figure out the algebra. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, mass transit is here to stay, as Ken said. There are way too many people that depend upon it, and it's an effective mode of transportation. But I do think it would be great if we could get to a point where when I do need to go to my office that 1 day a week, that I can do it safely in a bike. And I just don't feel that I can do it safely in a bike today in the city of Pasadena.
That's a good point.
That is a very good point.
Joe, the other thing I would say is I don't believe that the economic differences in our country are going to be solved because even when we get to that algebra, the people who still need a car or still drive on a bus or whatever, they are still going to be disadvantaged if they don't have access to the multiple ways to get where they need to go. And so if you're taking 2 or 3 buses to work right now, you're going to take 2 or 3 buses to work in the future if you don't have access to local job creation where you can, Michael, take a bike to work, right? Mm-hmm. If you're going to a hotel in downtown or if you're going to a restaurant. So those things are going to get exacerbated unless government figures out how to invest in the places that make sense to allow people to get to where they need to go to do their work, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not that easy.
Well, to borrow a phrase from Michael earlier, we could probably debate this for hours on end as well, but I realize it's probably taking us a little bit far afield of our original topic of discussion. So to get us closer to back on track, and again, excuse the pun, Ken, you mentioned earlier the phrase civic engagement.
Yep.
And to that end, I wanted to explore a little bit about how the COVID-19 pandemic has presently affected civic engagement.
It's affected it because people are having to figure out how to do it. Again, I would say in Pasadena that it's embedded in the fiber to lean in. So I would go to a neighborhood council meeting or a neighborhood local meeting, all kinds of meetings physically I would go. At first, when you're home and you're confronted with that, you're like, well, what am I supposed to do? City council meetings. There was a whole debate about a month and a half or 2 months ago. How many meetings should we have? A lot or a little? Should commissions have meetings? And there was a whole discussion, right? Look, in the end, the fact that we wanted to have meetings is different than many, many communities that weren't even asking that question, right? So I believe we're shifting. We still can have physical meetings right now with masks and social distancing. And in a year or so, we'll be able to do it because they'll have a vaccine or whatever. But being, to Michael, to your point, at a certain point, even when we're allowed to do that, someone's going to say, hey, wait a second, my kid's doing homework and we're serving dinner. Why don't we just do this meeting so I'm at home? But I still want to stay active. So my point is you're going to have a transition of how you do it, not whether you do it. And we're figuring out right now all the mechanisms for how to do it. Michael, you want to ride to work? Ride to work. You also want to go to a meeting at 8 o'clock at night. If you could do this, which you and I are doing right now, and we don't have to show up at some place, right? Mm-hmm. you can still be at home and your wife is at home and your kids at home. You can still do what you're doing. That's a tremendous advantage to being civically active, but not having to physically drive somewhere.
Yeah,
Michael, wait, before I get your take on this, I apologize for the interruption. I just wanted to point out that, again, we are live and we are opening up the phone lines. So if you at home would like to call in with a question or comment, you can call us at area code 951-356-6882.
As long as you don't have the last name Chawkins or Alvarez, you can call in and ask questions.
And again, we do welcome your questions and comments. Okay, Michael, my apologies for interrupting you. Please continue.
Please. No, and I hope we get some callers, because that'll be a lot of fun. But I'd like to again kind of touch on what Ken said, because I think that what's happening now is that again, organizations like the city have tried to figure out how to use technology, and they're experimenting with different things that they can do. Like just earlier before we started, our city council representative over here in District 6 sent out an email, and there's now kind of a routine email that is going out from their offices, and actually my neighbor who's in the district didn't get it, because I think your contact information has changed, and it just demonstrates that they're experimenting, they're trying. I mean, they're trying a new mode of communication in District 6. This is something new, but there's still a lot of work to be done, right? They definitely need to really carefully curate their email list to make sure that they're sending emails to the right people. But I hope that in our city that the city continues to use the interactive technologies to allow people to keep participating. I mean, it's not as if the number of people who are going to sign into a video conference session via Zoom or some other technology to a city council meeting, there aren't going to be that many people who do it. Okay, that's just because there aren't that many people in the city. There aren't that many people who will have the time and opportunity to do it, but some will. And I think that there's going to be a dedicated, group of people who will want to use the technology to stay engaged and stay involved once we're out of the pandemic.
All right. I do have a question here that has come in from a viewer on the Zoom chat, and he is directing this at both of you gentlemen. How will the pandemic affect the future of the community with respect to the issues facing Pasadena as 2020 open? Issues like overdevelopment, homelessness, the cost of housing and rent control, cannabis licensing, and quality public schools. And I need to point out, I've been told by our producers that this question actually comes from former Mayor Bill Bogart.
Good, Michael, I'll let you handle it.
I was going to pass that one in. I mean, Mayor Bogart, thanks for the question. That's a very ambitious question, my answer is that those kind of solutions are going to come because we have engaged citizens like Mayor Bogart and like Ken and I and like the people who are listening right now. Our city. I think what's wonderful about Pasadena is that it's a city that doesn't hesitate to take on big problems.
That's right.
Our city leaders are very ambitious, and they've been ambitious and engaged ever since I've been in the city of Pasadena. They like involvement, and by involving members of the community, as many people, if you want to get involved in city government, you can get involved today just like you could 6 months ago. And there's a lot of different opportunities and ways to get engaged. And I encourage people at this point in time to reach out. I mean, if you want to get engaged, you can reach out to your city council representative, and there's all sorts of information on the city's website, for example, about how to get engaged. How are we going to tackle those big problems? I mean, I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to, again, stay engaged and stay focused. The biggest problem that I foresee, to be honest, and I assume the mayor will agree with me on this, is financial. The pandemic has taken a significant toll on businesses and on our citizens in our community. And that means that the tax basis, that the amount of money the city is taking in taxes right now has plummeted dramatically. And I think the city's finances are going to be a very important cause of concern and the source of most of the energy and attention that our city government pays on policy issues in the near future. I think, unfortunately, that's also going to constrain our city's ability to solve some of these problems easily. But again, I don't think that means they're not going to try. But I do think, over the next, probably 3, 5, 8 years, the city's going to be in a financial hole. So is the school district. That is going to be very, very challenging, and is going to dramatically affect their efforts to be ambitious about developing new policy.
All right, Ken, I wonder if you had a few words on this.
Yeah, the only accent I would add to that is the issues that we had before COVID are still extant here. The access to government in lower income communities that don't have access to or the time to participate are accentuated in this space. So even if you have a group, you have a very active and civically active community in Pasadena, if you go to the places where people don't have the time because they're working 2 or 3 jobs, the energy because they're working 2 or 3 jobs, they've got multiple kids or they've got all kinds of things going on, that before COVID is accentuated now. So I think the people with resources are going to figure out how to lean in, use the technology, to the mayor's point, and address all of the issues that you mentioned, whether it's housing or healthcare or whatever it is. I think the people who are having difficulty getting access because they don't have the time or the space to deal with that still have the issues, and then accentuated by technology. And I would say to you, I think the government, local, county, state, whatever, needs to be asking the question, how are we really, and they've always asked this question, how are we reaching out to pull those people in? Not to say to them, hey, here's your Zoom account, here's your computer, come on in. What do you need to do to come into our world? Where do we need to make the space? Do we need to have a physical meeting? What do we need to do to bring you in? Not our world says you need a computer, you need Wi-Fi, and then you're in, because that may not work. We need to really be reaching out and asking, what do they need to come in to say affordable housing and healthcare and food and all that? And we need to do that times whatever. COVID has accentuated that because people are locked in their homes. They're stuck.
But is the virtual social model perhaps more exclusive than the prior models? I mean, let's take an average city council meeting, for example. If you as a citizen wanted to participate in a local city council meeting, traditionally you would drive down to City Hall and
wait, Joe, drive down or take the bus.
Or take the bus. Okay.
Or walk. So if you don't have a car and you don't have the time, so maybe you can't get to city council and you've got 3 kids and you got to feed them, whatever. So go ahead. But yeah, it's important to note, but yeah, you go to city council physically.
And you could have your voice heard. In contrast, now in the social distancing model, in the virtual social model, you have to have a computer, you have to have an internet connection, and you have to have a pretty solid understanding of how all of that operates in order to effectively communicate. Does this present challenges of exclusion?
Yes, it does. And I think, again, Ken kind of was alluding to that already. Yep. I mean, I think that's a challenge. Okay.
I mean, there's the financial costs of paying for an internet connection where you didn't have to pay to attend a city council meeting.
No, it's a challenge. And I think, in before the COVID era, I think many of our citizens who didn't have easy access to computers used the computers in the library system, for example. I mean, there are things the city has tried to do to make those resources available. And I think that's going to be a big challenge moving forward. I don't, Ken can speak more to how the PUSD responded to the pandemic, but many of our families with kids had to find those technological resources awfully quickly, and I think that again, as we move forward, and many of our kids in our communities are going to be forced or need to be in either a completely online or a hybrid online in-person environment. I think as more of us are going to be working from home, again, the city's financially constrained, but I do hope that we can figure out ways to try to meet those challenges and try to provide not just the physical technology, to these folks who need it, but more importantly, some ideas about how to be engaged.
Right.
Once they've crossed that hurdle
Right.
of having the technology, I honestly think that the bigger challenge once that hurdle is met is really informing our citizens about how to be engaged and what they can do, even if, as Ken said, they're time and resource constrained. I know folks in our community that they love living in Pasadena, and to the extent that they can give back, I do suspect that if we can give them the technology, they will try.
Agreed.
Well, that kind of sounds a little utopian or idealistic, I suppose, in so much as, I wonder how many of the underprivileged will see this as more of an exclusionary situation where politics and the ability to have your voice heard becomes more of something for the rich or the highly educated and less so for the more challenged.
Well, I think that many of the traditional modes of communicating with your elected officials and their representatives and their staff are still available. I mean, there's no reason why you can't write a letter. And in fact, to be honest, in today's world, in many ways, the physical forms of communications like that, or making a phone call, are oftentimes more effective than sending an email or being on social media. So I think that again, you can't forget those traditional modes of communication, and I would again encourage people to feel free to pick up their phone and call their elected officials, because in today's world, making a phone call or sending a letter is actually probably more effective than it was in my parents' world. Okay. Now, I do think that the technological barriers can make it more difficult for people without the means or the time to participate. But maybe it is a little utopian, and maybe I'm a little over optimistic about this. But I see these as challenges that a city like ours, if we want to engage our fellow citizens in this sort of electronic future that Ken and I are talking about, I think that's a challenge that we can meet.
Okay.
Joe, I would say the people of certain income are not watching this show. They don't have the time or inclination or orientation. They're not watching this show. And the question for government is to figure out, if you care about providing services for a wide spectrum of people, what are you doing to bring those people into this technology to watch this show and or participate? Frankly, this whole COVID thing could turn it on its head. The fact that you don't have to get on a bus or get in a car or whatever and go to City Hall or whatever, and you can just, while your kids are eating dinner, you can click and watch and participate and ask a question, might actually bring more people in. But we, the government and the civic society, have to bring those folks in to say, you now can do that. I don't believe that we're getting a wide swath of people who are participating in government necessarily any more than we have over a period of time. The thing that attracts me and attracted me to Pasadena is it does have a civic orientation. People are very active. The question is, which people? Who are you engaging? Who are the people that are most affected by COVID and Black Lives Matter and all that stuff? And are they being pulled into the conversation technologically? And I'm not sure they are. I don't know if we have a way of measuring it, but I'm not sure they are. And I would ask the councilmen from the various districts, councilmen and women from the various districts, can you determine who is watching this? And if they are watching this, how do you get more of them to watch this and participate?
Well, Ken, I will also just pick a point with you on this one, because I'm not entirely sure that the technology is the issue. Okay, I think the issue really is that in the United States in general, Pasadena is an exception.
Yep.
Okay, because we do have a relatively engaged citizenry, unlike most other parts of the country.
Agreed.
That said, there's a definite deficit of interest in participating in local civic affairs. And I think that's what the moment creates. Okay, the moment creates an opportunity for our city government to really be reaching out and to try to talk to people about how important our community is, and how important being engaged in some way, shape, or form can be.
Yeah.
And then if we can use the technology to facilitate that, I know you agree with me on this.
No, I do. I'm in agreement 100%, Michael. I agree.
Yeah, see, I just think we have this really unique moment. And what I sense is that I sense this opportunity. And I really will continue to encourage, our elected officials to try to take advantage of this opportunity to the extent that we can get a handful or a few handfuls of people to get engaged in a Zoom city council meeting or a planning session or in their PTA or something like that. That's great. Those maybe some of those people may be people who have participated in the past, but I'll bet you some aren't.
Yep.
Okay. And if we can push those people to get their friends, their family, people in their neighborhood to engage electronically, I think that we can meet some of these challenges, and we can really kind of generate a stronger civic life in Pasadena.
Agree 100%.
All right. Well, so far we have discussed a great deal about the COVID-19 pandemic, but we would be remiss if we did not mention the recent protests. Certainly that is a form of civic engagement. Is it the most productive, and are there other avenues that could and should be explored that might even prove more effective?
Well, you mean the Black Lives Matter protests? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. The answer is the version of what Michael just said. I think, look, those are effective, but we have a window now to use the technology to bring more people in. You look, back in the day, you would send postcards. And then back in the day, you would send letters. And then all of a sudden it was email. Michael, to your point, email is so passé anymore. A legislator who gets thousands of emails doesn't even pay attention. But they get texts and they get social media and they get Twitter. All of a sudden, the point is, Joe, I think that yes, those protests physically are important, but they become less important as the impulse to government decision makers is looking at both volume as well as sort of substance, when they get thousands and thousands of messages that are coming electronically. And, people, there's nothing that replaces someone that shows up at your council district door or your assembly district door or whatever. But, it doesn't replace it, but doesn't mean it's more valuable then. These new tools, this new technology is redefining how democratic action works. You have thousands of people in the streets, screaming and yelling and doing whatever they're doing in protest. It's powerful, right? Is it more powerful or less powerful? I don't know. But it's being augmented and accentuated with the technology that we're being forced to use. But by the way, because many of us would not go to the physical demonstrations because we were worried about COVID. So the window is opening to say, how else do we participate? And it's going to take 6 months or how many months, year, whatever, to readjust. Michael, I don't know.
How this plays out in the long run in local, state, and national politics, I think is an open question. I do think it's a significant moment. I do think that there is a watershed moment here that the Black Lives Matter movement and protest, and I won't put it in the past tense. I think the protests continue. And I think they will continue because I think that there is a strong push and demand that is widespread in our community and also throughout the state and the country, to really resolve some of these problems with police brutality and the way policing has been conducted in our country. So I think that this moment is an important one, and I do think that it's going to continue. In one immediate question is, how does it play out in the fall election? That's a close enough event where I suspect, and I think many of my colleagues in political science believe, that the momentum from these protests is going to carry forward and factor very significantly as we get closer to the general election. So I do think that in one way, you ask if it's going to matter, I do think it's going to have a very profound impact in November. I think that turnout in this fall's election is likely to be significantly stronger than it might otherwise have been, because I do think there's an energy there and a desire for change. And the ballot, the ballot box is a very blunt tool for change. But from what I have seen and heard, I do suspect that it sounds like many of the people involved in these protests and in this movement are really starting to think hard about making sure that they get involved in the fall and that they get out and cast ballots, because that is going to be one of the most important opportunities they have to affect the change they want.
Well, all right, we are coming close to the end of the show. We do still have a few minutes, but it's interesting that you bring up the ballot box, because that does bring me to another important question. Voters in the community, LA County specifically, had major problems with the new technological-based voting system during the March primaries. What are we in store for in November?
Well, one of the major reasons that those problems occurred in the March primary was California. We passed a law a few years ago called the Voter Choice Act, and the Voter Choice Act allowed counties to start sending mail ballots to every registered voter and move towards a vote center model. LA County was exempted from the requirement to send out the mail ballots, but moved towards the vote center model. So as a consequence, there were many, many more voters who showed up on election day than the technology and the vote center model could easily support. So the most important thing that's going to happen in LA County this fall is that every voter in LA County is going to get a ballot sent to them by mail. That's going to alleviate a lot of the pressure on the vote centers that we saw in the spring. And the county has also, they recently just issued a report, and we've been doing a lot of research on this with the county in collaboration with them to try to better understand the technological problems that occurred in March and to try to make sure that they don't occur again in November or in any future election that uses these technologies.
Well, this is, I'm going to go slightly deeper politically on this next one. You mentioned that the plan is to send out a ballot by mail, I guess, as more or less a backup for the electronic voting machine. But our current administration has seemed to have embarked on a campaign to discredit the legitimacy or the security of such a program. And how is that going to affect voter turnout and the expectations for the public in general when it comes to civic engagement?
Well, in California and in Los Angeles County in particular, we're used to voting by mail. There's still a majority of voters, even though not everybody didn't get a ballot and send it to them in the mail in the spring. Most voters in Southern California and LA County have received a vote by mail ballot and have voted in the past. They know that they get that ballot in the mail. They can send it back in the mail. They can take it, drop it off, or they can bring it with them and vote in person on election day. Those options will all exist in November. So I think that here in California, I think most people are relatively confident in the security of that process. There's very little. I've done a lot of research on election fraud. There's really pretty much no evidence that there's significant election fraud here in Southern California, in California in general, or in the United States. We do see some instances of it on occasion, and sometimes it does involve vote by mail ballots. But there are so many safeguards in place, ranging from how the ballots are sent, the signatures are checked, the voter's identity is verified, and election officials confirm that if they're going to include a particular vote by mail ballot in tabulation, that person hasn't cast another ballot in some other way. So there's an enormous number of safeguards that exist behind the scenes. And if anybody's interested, our website, Monitoring the Election, has a lot of information on it about that. The CalTech Voting Technology Project website has enormous amount of information on it. And again, I'm confident as someone who studies this process that we can have a safe and effective and usable and accessible election this fall, even if it's conducted mainly by mail.
Well, Michael, you mentioned a couple of websites there. I wonder if you could give those to us, give that to our viewers at home right now.
Well, the easiest one is vote.caltech.edu, and that's our primary website for the CalTech MIT Voting Technology Project. And our Monitoring the Election website is monitoringtheelection.us, I believe, is the dot on it. But that's also linked off of the Voting Technology Project website. And you can go to the CalTech website. You can find me. You can send me an email. I'll help you find the information you need, and I'll just direct them all to Ken.
Ken, and I know you wanted to say something there.
Just very, very, very quickly. Look, people act as if we've not had fraud and discrepancies in our normal voting processes. It's not accurate to suggest that the voting by mail is going to produce any more discrepancies than any other system. People working, like Michael and others, are working very, very hard. It's political smoke and mirrors. At this point, we're trying to make it easier for people to cast their ballots, period. That's what we're trying to do. And we're doing it in a safe way. You can go to the websites and look at it. Look at the Secretary of State in the state of California. They're doing everything they can to secure those votes. So just get out and vote. That's the most important thing.
Yeah,
all right.
Vote by mail, vote in person.
Yep.
We only have a couple of minutes left in the program. I wanted to ask this one last question to both of you gentlemen, that aside from the pandemic, what other obstacles do you see that stand in the way of maintaining or increasing civic and political engagement in the future?
Well, that's a harder question, Michael.
And you've only got a couple of minutes to answer.
Well, look, I'll go back to what I said earlier in response to Mayor Bogart. Okay. I think the biggest problem that we face is financial. I think, the state just went through its initial budgetary process. The state's budget is bleak. I think the cities and the county's finances are going to be bleak. I think that's going to be the biggest impediment that our governments face to trying to do some of the optimistic things that I suggested to continue to engage our citizenry. But I really think that public finance is going to be one of the biggest concerns that we have for easily the next 5 to 8 years.
I would say in a sort of a little bit more esoteric area. Look, the numbers of people, young people in particular, who believe in government has been declining over the years. The number of people who believe that government makes a difference has been declining over years. People are not believing that our democratic system of self-government works. And in fact, during COVID, when you look at places like Russia or China or others where they can make real quick decisions and solve things, there's an attraction to that, saying, hey, they fixed it. Well, they fixed it, but that's not the way to govern overall when we're not in COVID. I think there's a real danger here to people being attracted to a non-democratic system of self-governance. And so they just the big challenge, Joe, is that they want to say, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to be engaged like Pasadena. I don't want to participate. I want the government to take care of stuff. I believe that's a real danger to civic activity. If you don't believe it's going to work, then why would you be active? And so I think the civic education, civic activity needs to be generated from local, state and federal government that says this matters. To make our worlds a better place, you have to participate.
All right. Well, Ken, that is very, very well thought out and well worded. I'm afraid we have completely run out of time, and I know we could continue talking for a long time. Mr. Ken Chawkins and Dr. Michael Alvarez, thank you both so much for joining us this evening. It has been a fascinating conversation and a truly informative one. To you viewers at home, if there are topics that you would like to see addressed on our discussions, you can email them to us at arroyolive@pasadenamedia.org, and we may include them in a future broadcast. Thank you so much for watching this evening. Have a great night.
Thank you.